The slight turbulence was only the beginning. But the real shock came when the woman in seat 1A was served a dry slice of bread and a glass of water, while everyone around her raised their champagne glasses under the soft amber light of first class. She looked up slowly, her eyes meeting the half-smile of the flight attendant, Haley Ross, 28 years old, blonde hair tied neatly, her smile professionally trained but cold as glass. "First-class meals are for passengers who deserve them," Haley said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. A few thin knife-like laughs followed. A man a few rows back murmured to his companion. Maybe she got a last-minute upgrade. Phones were raised, cameras opened, and within seconds, humiliation began to spread through the air. The Silverline Airways jet cut through grey clouds, the sunset reflecting on the walnut dining tables. Everything was perfect, except for the silence in seat 1A. She sat there with her hands resting calmly on her lap, saying nothing, showing no reaction. Her name was Dr. Amelia Grant, 42 years old. No one in the cabin knew that the woman in the simple white shirt was the head of Grant Global Holdings, the largest financial backer of the very airline they were flying. To the world, she was a symbol of intellect and composure, but at 30,000 feet, she was just another black woman, being humiliated by those who were supposed to serve her. The metallic rattle of the service cart echoed through the aisle. Haley moved from row to row, serving with a perfect smile. Wine glasses shimmered, silver cutlery gleamed. But when she reached Amelia's seat, the smile vanished. "This is all you get," Haley said coldly, placing the glass of water and the dry bread on the tray. Amelia straightened her voice, calm and steady. "I believe there's been a mistake." "There's no mistake," Haley cut in sharply, her tone acidic. "First-class meals are for paying customers." On the opposite aisle, a middle-aged man chuckled. "She probably doesn't know how to use silverware." Laughter rippled through the cabin. Amelia remained still, but inside a quiet fire began to burn. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. No one noticed that the phone camera of a passenger had already gone viral, streaming live to over 20,000 viewers with the title, "Black Woman Humiliated in First Class." And she, the woman in the video, sat with perfect posture, her gaze calm as still water. No one knew that every breath she took was controlled with the discipline forged from 20 years of leadership. Heavy footsteps approached. Edward Turner, the cabin manager, appeared, his tailored vest crisp, his voice deep with authority. "What's going on here, Haley? She keeps insisting on a first-class meal, even though she clearly doesn't belong here." Edward's eyes scanned Amelia from head to toe, long enough to hold judgment. Then he said, not bothering to lower his voice, "She should be grateful to sit here at all. Bread and water are more than enough." Silence fell. Some passengers exhaled softly. A young woman in seat 3B whispered into her live stream. They actually said that. On this flight. In 2025. Amelia's fingers tightened slightly around her phone. She could have reacted, could have shouted, could have thrown the glass of water back at them. But she didn't. Instead, she looked straight at Edward, her tone as steady as a heartbeat. "I paid for this seat, and I expect the same respect as any other passenger." Edward leaned closer, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn." "Understood." The words fell heavy, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Haley stood beside him, arms crossed, smirking. A few passengers lowered their eyes, but no one spoke. Amelia took a slow breath and turned toward the window where the golden dusk painted the clouds. How many times, she wondered, how many times must she prove her worth just because of her color and her gender? She once believed that reaching the top would erase prejudice. But at 30,000 feet, she realized that bias didn't stay on the ground. It flew with people. First class, elegant, yet devoid of empathy. A man in an Armani suit looked at her over his wine glass, his expression a mix of pity and curiosity. Will she react, he thought, or stay silent like everyone else? But Haley didn't wait for a reaction. She leaned in her voice, sharp, low, and dripping with mockery. You should know your place. Amelia turned back her gaze, no longer soft, but sharp as a blade, though still composed. Oh, I do, she said with a faint smile, very clearly. Haley hesitated for half a second, and Edward frowned. Amelia placed her phone face down on the tray table. Her movements were calm, but a faint light flickered on the screen, just enough for Haley to see a glowing emblem, the security seal of Grant Global Network. For reasons she couldn't explain, the young attendant's heartbeat quickened. The air in the cabin thickened heavy with tension, as if something was about to happen, something no one on that plane would ever forget. Amelia straightened her back, her eyes sweeping across the cabin, the place where arrogance and power sat side by side in silence. One slice of bread, one glass of water, too little for a meal, yet more than enough to expose human truth. She closed her eyes briefly. The sting of humiliation faded, replaced by something else, a burning quiet, a flame that made no sound, no smoke, but promised to consume every prejudice laid before her. And as the sunset reflected off the silver fuselage, Dr. Amelia Grant, the woman mocked for being unworthy, whispered to herself, "All right then, if they want to test where I belong, I'll show them." The phone on her tray vibrated softly. A notification appeared in silence, the message precise and cold as a declaration of war connection, secured. Protocol ready. The storm had just begun. The plane glided smoothly through the clouds, the steady hum of the engines like a heartbeat. But inside the first-class cabin, the air had changed, cold, thin and suffocating. In seat 1, a Dr. Amelia Grant sat still, her fingers interlaced eyes, following the streaks of light outside the window. Since childhood, she had learned how to endure judgmental stares. But today was different. This time it wasn't a lesson, it was a verdict. She remembered that morning before the flight in her minimalist New York apartment, where everything was tidy and quiet, except for the flood of urgent notifications in her inbox. An emergency board meeting, a financial crisis, and an airline, Silverline Airways, on the verge of losing the biggest sponsorship contract in its history. They had called for help, and Amelia, the woman once known as the one who could turn any crisis around with deadly calm, decided to come herself. No entourage, no security team, just a ticket in her name, and a quiet intent to observe how Silverline treated its passengers before she signed a $900 million contract extension. She wanted to know the truth, and now she had it, though not in the way she expected. Haley Ross, the young flight attendant, continued to serve with mechanical poise. She leaned toward the passenger in seat 2. A pouring red wine with a smile so warm it looked rehearsed. Meanwhile, Amelia stared at the slice of bread on her tray, cold, dry, and symbolic. From the eyes of others, she was just a simply dressed black woman, someone who must have wandered into first class by accident. But inside, the mind once described by Harvard as the sharpest financial brain of the decade, every number, every face, every word was being recorded like data. She didn't react, she observed, because at Amelia's level, Reaction was emotion. Observation was power. From the right side of the cabin, a man in a grey suit, Edward Turner, the cabin manager, quietly studied her. His eyes were filled with suspicion, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she didn't look like someone who belonged there. He whispered to Haley as she passed by, "Who is she?" "No idea, but definitely not a VIP." Haley replied with a faint smirk. "Just keep the service minimal. First class isn't for strangers." And so they turned away, convinced they were doing the right thing. But in the silence, Amelia could feel every stare, every sneer. A middle-aged couple eating soup looked at her with a mix of pity and confusion. A young man wearing headphones pretended not to notice, but secretly recorded. Their silence wasn't neutral. It was complicity. She felt her hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from anger. Not the kind that burns hot, but the cold, disciplined kind that comes from being underestimated too many times. 10 minutes passed. Haley returned to check if Amelia had caused trouble. "Are you all right?" she asked, feigning concern. Amelia looked up and gave a faint smile. "I'm fine, just a bit thirsty." "I can bring you more water," Haley said, holding back a grin. "That won't be necessary," Amelia replied, softly but firmly. "I don't need more water." The calmness in her tone made Haley freeze for half a second. For the first time, Amelia's composure made her uneasy. In the cockpit, the seatbelt sign was still on. The plane cruised steadily at 33,000 feet. A sudden gust of wind shook the fuselage lightly, and Haley gripped the tray to steady herself. When she looked up, she saw Edward standing beside Amelia, his expression cold and tense. "Is there a problem here?" Mum Edward asked. "No," Amelia said evenly, "but it seems your team has forgotten the first rule of customer service." "And what rule is that respect doesn't depend on skin color?" A flush crept up Edward's face. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by a woman he believed didn't belong. "You should be careful with your words," he said sharply. "Don't make this flight any more unpleasant." "Unpleasant?" Amelia tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but edged with warning. "You think the person being humiliated is the one making things unpleasant?" Haley swallowed hard. Edward was silent for 3 seconds before turning away and walking off. When his figure disappeared behind the curtain, Amelia exhaled slowly. She had once believed she had mastered endurance, but now she saw more clearly than ever. Arrogance didn't just live in boardrooms or politics. It lived in smiles, in trays of food, in the way someone decided who was worthy of being served. She glanced at her phone. A faint security icon glowed in the corner part of the Internal Grant Global Network, a system she herself had designed capable of linking to the financial data of partner corporations. And among them was Silverline Airways. She slid her finger across the screen, opening the encrypted access interface. Her inner voice was calm but resolute. If they can't learn through words, they'll learn through consequences. In seat 2A, a middle-aged businesswoman whispered to her husband, "I feel sorry for her, but let's not get involved." The man nodded and looked away. The woman had no idea that the person she pitied was about to shake the entire airline to its core. Outside the window, the sky darkened. A flash of lightning lit up the clouds, reflecting across Amelia's face. The light didn't blind her, it illuminated her, as if she had reached a moment of clarity. Because in that instant, she understood this wasn't just about her. It was about the countless people who had ever been dismissed or demeaned living again through her eyes. Her breath, her silence. A silence the world could no longer afford to ignore. She touched the screen gently. A notification appeared. Access granted. Audit protocol standing by. Amelia smiled faintly, not out of vengeance, but because justice was near. In the next few minutes, when the world inside that cabin turned upside down, they would finally understand a truth she had spent a lifetime learning. Respect isn't a gift you give to others. It's a measure of whether you deserve to be human. The plane kept flying, but from that very moment, everything had already begun to fall. The air in first class felt dense, as if it were being pressed between two layers of clouds. The soft background music still played, but every note seemed hollow, because every eye, every phone, every camera was now pointed at Seat 1A. A cold slice of bread, a glass of water, a silent woman sitting beneath a storm of contemptuous gazes. That silence, fragile as it seemed, was what began to make everyone afraid. "You're still sitting here," Haley Ross's voice carried a hint of mockery as she rolled the service cart back down the aisle. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was just enough for the man in Seat 2B to hear enough to draw a few small smirks. Haley raised an eyebrow and tilted her head toward Amelia. "Not hungry. Or maybe you're afraid you don't know how to use silver cutlery." A few quiet laughs broke out like metal scraping against glass cold, sharp and empty. Amelia lifted her gaze to meet Haley's. No anger, no disdain, only an unsettling calm. "I'm waiting for the meal I paid for," she said softly, her voice light as air but hard as steel. Haley pressed her lips together and glanced toward her supervisor. Edward Turner approached his face, spreading into what he considered a powerful smile. "Ma'am," he began, "please don't make things difficult. You see, some people just aren't suited for the first-class environment." The words slid through the air like a velvet-coated blade. No one in the cabin dared to speak. Some looked down at their meals, others discreetly lifted their phones, ready to capture the drama unfolding before them. Amelia's eyes never left him. "I think you just redefined the word unsuited." Edward chuckled faintly. "I'm just stating the truth. People of stature understand the rules of where they belong. Others should be grateful they're even here." Haley stood beside him, arms crossed, a small smirk curling on her lips. "Well said," she whispered, just loud enough for Amelia to hear. First class, the place once advertised as the paradise of refinement, had now turned into a stage for arrogance. People laughed, filmed, even went live with the caption, "Airplane drama. Strange passenger demands first-class meal. The viewer count climbed fast, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000. But Amelia remained still. No one knew that the phone, lying face down on her tray, was recording everything. The voices, the faces, the laughter, every single insult. She was no longer alone. The world was about to watch. Edward leaned on the armrest of her seat, bending closer. "Listen, Miss Grant. First class is for people who've earned their place. You might be sitting here, but don't think that makes you one of them." Those words weren't loud, but they pierced Amelia's heart like a cold bullet. In that moment, she didn't just hear Edward's voice. She heard echoes from her past, the teacher who once told her to choose an easier career, the business partner who once said they needed a brighter face for the campaign. After all the years of rising, after all the times she had proven herself, here she was at the top, still being treated as an intruder. She exhaled slowly. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not one of them." Edward smiled faintly, thinking he'd won. But Amelia continued, her voice cold and steady. "Because I don't need to belong to first class. I built it." The cabin went silent. Haley froze. Edward frowned. A few passengers exchanged glances, holding their breath. A young man a few rows back whispered, "Oh my God, did she just say that?" "I don't know," his companion murmured, "but I think this is about to get big." Edward lost his composure. He straightened up, his face flushed red. "You're disturbing other passengers. If you don't comply with the rules, I'll have security escort you to economy." Amelia looked up, her eyes no longer those of someone insulted, but of someone deciding the fate of everyone in front of her. "You can call security," she said. "But when you do, make sure you also call your superiors, because I promise they'll want to hear about this." Her tone wasn't loud or forceful, but it made Haley's pulse quicken and sent a chill down Edward's spine. "Are you threatening me?" Edward growled. "No," Amelia replied, her eyes locked on his. "I'm not threatening you. I'm just recording the truth." Haley let out a short, nervous laugh, trying to regain control. "That's funny. You think having a phone gives you power?" Amelia tilted her head slightly, a faint smile forming. "I don't need power. I have evidence." The response left Haley speechless. She glanced at Edward, but he said nothing. A wave of uncertainty spread through the cabin. Suddenly no one was sure who actually held control in this confrontation. Then Edward slammed his hand down on the service cart, the sound cracking through the air like a gavel. "Enough," he shouted. "You'll eat or leave this seat. I won't allow anyone to cause chaos in first class." The plane jolted slightly. An elderly woman gasped, dropping her spoon. Haley frowned, trying to regain her composure, but her voice trembled. "Edward, maybe we should—" "No," he barked. "She needs to learn her place." Every eye turned to Amelia. Slowly she placed her glass of water down and rose to her feet. The light from the window reflected across her face, soft yet fierce. "You're right," she said quietly, her tone dropping low each word, cutting through the silence. "It's time I set my own boundaries." For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Amelia tapped a button on her phone, and the screen lit up. A faint beep echoed through the cabin. Then suddenly every electronic device belonging to the crew went dark. A metallic hum, a hiss from the radio system, and then silence. The monitors flickered, displaying a red warning across the screens. Internal audit protocol activated. Edward's eyes widened. "What the hell is this?" Haley's voice trembled. "The system's locked. I can't access anything." Amelia stood calmly amidst the chaos, her gaze cutting through the false wall of authority like a blade. "I told you," she said softly. "I'm not threatening. I'm recording." The cabin held its breath. Passengers' phones buzzed non-stop with alerts. Internal incident reported on Silverline Flight 312. Over 70,000 people were now watching the live feed, unaware that the very woman they saw humiliated had triggered the storm herself. She turned toward Edward, her voice calm yet commanding. "This isn't a malfunction. It's an investigation." Edward stumbled back a step. Amelia continued her words, firm and precise. "You thought you could decide who deserves respect. But you forgot I'm the one who decides who deserves to keep their job." The cabin fell utterly silent. A chill rippled through every row. And in that silence, Amelia Grant, the woman once humiliated in the sky, was taking back her sky. The first-class cabin of Silverline Flight 312 still glowed with light, but the air had grown heavy like smoke. No more clinking of spoons on plates, no more wine pouring into crystal. Only the quickened breaths of people who once believed they were above it all, now afraid of falling. Haley stood frozen beside the service cart, her fingers clenched white. The scanner in her hand flickered, then died with a dry beep. It's locked," she stammered, looking to Edward. Edward Turner's face flushed scarlet, the tendons in his neck standing out. Do it again. Reboot everything. I tried. The system says total failure. The screen at the front of the cabin flashed, and a red line appeared. Slowly audit protocol activated. Executive access required. A few passengers leaned forward, trying to understand. A man wearing a Rolex whispered, "Audit protocol." That's the airline's internal control system. The woman beside him looked up her face, draining of color. But it can only be triggered from the highest executive level. In seat 1, a Dr. Amelia Grant remained still. She did not look around, did not explain, did not hurry. The dim glow of the screen reflected on a face so calm it was frightening, the kind of composure only those who have held real power understand. "Who is she?" someone murmured. "Maybe a spy," another said, under their breath. "A journalist. No, she looks like she knows exactly what she's doing." Edward stepped forward, his voice, forced, steady but trembling underneath. "What did you just do, ma'am? Record?" Amelia answered her tone, quieter than the engines, yet sharper than a blade. Record. Edward frowned. "You think this is a joke? You just shut down the entire flight system." "I didn't shut it down." Amelia lifted her gaze. "You did the moment you forgot who you serve." Haley turned to Edward, her voice breaking. "She's right. I can't access the passenger list. The system says permission revoked." "Forget it. Use the backup admin," Edward snapped. "It is asking for high-level executive codes." Sweat beaded on Edward's brow. A second later, his personal display lit up with a message. "Access locked, executive security engaged." The cabin erupted in whispers. A passenger live streaming began to shake the camera, stuttering. "You guys, this is huge. The airline is being audited in the air." Edward inhaled, reaching for his aura of authority. He bent close and spoke low to Amelia. "Who are you? Say it. If you don't, I'll call security when we land. You will not have to wait that long." Amelia said, her voice like a cold wind, cutting straight through him. They are already listening. At that moment, the overhead speakers clicked on with a soft hiss, and a composed female voice filled the cabin. "This is Silverline Operations. All crew on Flight 312 cease all activity. All accounts have been temporarily locked for investigation. Follow instructions and await further orders." Murmurs burst into noise. Haley stumbled back, hands shaking. Edward looked around, mouth-open words failing him. Amelia tilted her head slightly, eyes fixed on him. "I warned you. You mistook my silence for weakness." Haley broke into tears. I didn't mean to. I was just following protocol." "Protocol?" Amelia asked, her voice gentle, yet bringing the entire cabin to a standstill. "Which protocol allows you to humiliate a passenger because of their skin color and their clothes?" Haley sobbed, unable to answer. Edward clenched his fists, grasping for a fragment of dignity. "You have no authority." "No authority." Amelia rose. Her voice turned resonant and precise, each word ringing clear. "You are right. I do not need authority. I am authority." Silence crashed down. Passengers stilled, the cabin swallowed by a vacuum of quiet. Amelia took a step forward, standing level with Edward, a man twice her size, who now edged back as if pressed by an invisible force. "You know," she said slowly, "my whole life I was taught that silence is the only way to survive. But today I realized silence only convinces the arrogant that they are right." She turned to Haley, her gaze stripped of anger, filled instead with a deep, quiet disappointment. "I am not angry about a slice of bread or a glass of water. I am angry because you laughed while someone was being degraded. You thought it was a joke. To me, it is evidence. and evidence never disappears. Haley wept openly. Some passengers lowered their heads, ashamed of their silence. Outside, the night sky opened wide. Moonlight slid through the window and across Amelia's face, making her seem both of the sky and the one judging it. She returned to her seat and set her phone on the table. The screen brightened with a new message. Executive verification in progress. Edward's voice trembled. What are you doing?" "Verifying the truth," Amelia replied. 10 seconds later, the large cabin screen displayed the emblem of Grant Global Holdings, followed by a confirmation of executive authority. A system voice announced clear and cold, "Dr. Amelia Grant, Chief Executive Officer, Grant Global Holdings, Primary Contractor, Silverline Airways." Mouths fell open across the cabin. Haley's tears stopped. Edward stood rigid, his face white as paper. You are the person you just insulted," Amelia said evenly. "The person you tried to lecture about first-class rules, and the person holding the contract that lets you have a job today." A soft sigh drifted from a row behind. Someone whispered, "My God, she's the CEO of Grant Global. That company underwrites the entire Silverline project." And he just humiliated her. Awareness rippled through the cabin like an earthquake. Amelia stood there, not triumphant, not enraged, simply composed like someone who had just concluded a test of human decency. Edward scrambled for a lifeline. "Dr. Grant." "I didn't know. I'm sorry, it was all a misunderstanding." Amelia regarded him, head slightly inclined. "No, you knew. You just did not care. And that is the problem with this world. People only respect you when they know you have power." She picked up the abandoned slice of bread from her tray and set it before him. "Here, a slice of bread for you. Remember it every time you are tempted to laugh at someone else's humiliation." Edward lowered his head, his lips trembling. Haley collapsed into a seat, her face wet with tears. Amelia looked around the cabin, her voice deepening, slowing resonant like a vow. Silence is not weakness. But there are moments when silence is also a sin. Today, I choose to speak not only for myself, but for everyone who was ever told they do not belong here. No one spoke. Only the eyes remained heavy with shame, newly awake, and filled with respect. And in the cool blue glow of the screens, the woman once mocked over a slice of bread now stood as a symbol of dignity amid the clouds. First class was quiet, not out of fear, but because for the first time they were hearing the true voice of a human being. The final beep echoed through the first-class cabin like an offbeat heartbeat. Then came absolute silence. No device was working, no indicator lights, no screens, no signal. Faces that once glowed under the soft, golden light now turned pale. Half-finished glasses of expensive wine trembled in the hands of people who had just lost control. Haley was the first to speak, her voice shaking. Everything's locked. The scanners, the access cards, even the automated wine cabinet won't open. Edward Turner, the cabin manager, snatched the tablet from her hands, scrolling furiously. The screen flashed a few lines of glowing red text. Access denied. Executive control enabled. "What the hell is going on?" Edward shouted, his face flushed red. Who authorized executive-level access? A passenger sitting behind them, an IT engineer, spoke up quietly, his calm voice somehow more chilling than Edward's anger. That level of access is only granted to the partner corporation's top leadership or the system's owner. Haley turned to Amelia, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. No, it can't be. Amelia remained still. In front of her, the glow from her phone reflected on the table, pulsing softly, like the heartbeat of a coming storm. She said nothing, just stared out the window, where the moonlight pierced through torn white clouds like a shredded veil. Her silence was more terrifying than any threat. The cabin waited, but no one dared to ask. Then the overhead speakers came alive. A cold, measured female voice filled the air, calm and mechanical. "This is Silverline Airways Operations. Flight 312 has been placed under emergency internal audit protocol. All involved personnel are to remain in position and await instructions." The sound echoed through the cabin, colder than the air conditioning. No one understood what was happening. A passenger whispered, "An internal audit in mid-air that's never happened before." Edward turned to Haley, his voice now trembling. "Do you have any idea who you just served?" Haley shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I was just following procedure." "Procedure?" Edward shouted. "You just humiliated the CEO of the airline's major partner. Do you have any idea what that means?" Haley dropped to her knees, her hands covering her mouth. Amelia still sat quietly, her expression unreadable, not because she felt nothing, but because she was forcing herself to keep everything contained. Inside, her memories returned, like fragments of broken glass. Meetings full of men in suits staring at her with doubt. Congratulatory remarks laced with condescension. You were chosen for diversity, not talent. The times she walked into a boardroom only to be asked, "Have you finished cleaning the room?" She had endured it all, choosing silence to climb higher, to win through results. But today in the sky, she realized something. When you stay silent too long, people start to believe you agree. The large cabin screen flickered to life, displaying the logo of Grant Global Holdings. White letters appeared across it: audit protocol initiated by Dr. Amelia Grant. A wave of whispers rippled through the cabin. A middle-aged woman covered her mouth. "Oh my God, she really is the CEO of Grant Global." A young man turned to his friend and whispered, "That company owns nearly 40% of Silverline. She has the power to shut the entire system down." Haley broke into sobs. I didn't know. Edward sank into a seat, his hands trembling. He knew that every word, every gesture was being recorded, and none of it could be erased. Amelia stood up. Her white suit caught the dim cabin light, making her appear almost like a beam of light among those shrinking in fear. She walked toward Edward, her voice low and steady, each word striking like a hammer against metal. "You said I don't belong here. You're wrong. It's the way you behave that makes this place unworthy of decent people." Edward opened his mouth, but no words came. She turned to Haley. "And you? You laughed while someone was humiliated. Don't tell me it was just procedure. Because procedures don't teach contempt. They only reveal character." Haley fell to the floor, crying uncontrollably. The speakers clicked on again. "Message from operations. All crew accounts on Flight 312 are hereby suspended, pending investigation. Reason: severe violation of service protocol and professional ethics. Await final decision from the Chief Executive Officer of Grant Global Holdings." A soft ding sounded, then silence. No one dared to breathe too loudly. A college student live-streaming whispered into his phone, his voice trembling. "Oh my God, I'm witnessing a CEO disciplining an entire flight crew mid-air." More than 200,000 people were watching live. The comments flooded in like waves. That's justice. Respect should never have to be demanded. It should be default. She's a new symbol of dignity. Amelia returned to her seat, her gaze fixed on the window. Beneath her, the clouds churned, glowing silver under the moonlight. Inside her, anger melted away, replaced by something else release. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need revenge. She only needed to let the truth speak for itself. Edward rose, stammering. "Miss Grant, I'm sorry, I didn't know." "You knew," she interrupted softly, her eyes never leaving the window. "You always knew. You just thought you'd never be held accountable." She turned toward him, her voice a whisper, yet heavy enough to crush the air. "Arrogance may let you fly high, Edward, but it doesn't come with wings." The cabin went still. Haley bowed her head, her hair falling forward, her hands trembling. A soft shudder passed through the plane, but no one panicked. They simply sat watching the black woman, who now stood firm beneath the white lights. On the main screen, the final message appeared: "Executive order confirmed. Crew suspended effective immediately." Then it went dark. Amelia inhaled deeply, closing her eyes. There was no triumph in her heart, only a quiet sorrow, because she knew true victory wasn't about getting someone fired. It was about the moment people finally realized that dignity is never defined by the seat you occupy, but by how you treat others. And as she opened her eyes again with moonlight spreading across the clouds, she whispered just loud enough for herself to hear. "Justice doesn't need noise, it only needs timing." The plane kept flying, but for everyone on board from that moment on, they were no longer flying on fuel. They were flying on a lesson about respect. In the first-class cabin, the light dimmed until only pale moonlight slipped through the window, and the air felt heavy, as if someone had pulled the oxygen from the room. No one spoke, but everyone understood that an invisible boundary had just been broken. They were not merely witnessing an aviation incident. They were watching power change places where the one who had been looked down on became the one who judged. The system speakers sounded again, this time deeper and more severe. Notice from the Silver Line Operations Office. All personnel on Flight 312 are temporarily suspended from all access. A high-level oversight team is being deployed at San Francisco International Airport. Any resistance will be considered a serious violation of internal regulations. Each word fell like a sentence. Edward dropped into a seat, his broad hands shaking. Haley kept her head, bowed, tears falling without stopping. And Amelia, the woman who had just been humiliated for supposedly not deserving first class, sat quietly looking out the window, where white clouds drifted by like the flow of time. A young passenger in seat 3A, live streaming from the start, turned his camera and whispered, "You are all watching this more than 300,000 people." She is not only teaching this crew a lesson, she is making the whole world rethink how they treat others. His phone screen filled with comments. "I am crying. This is what real power looks like. Let her be the CEO of the world." The speakers went silent. Stillness returned. Then Edward, clinging to a last shred of pride, inhaled and tried to steady his voice. "Miss Grant, I know I was wrong. But please do not let this go too far. We have families, we have jobs." Amelia turned back her eyes, heavy rather than cold. "You think I want this?" Her voice was gentle but weighty. "You think I want to see people lose their jobs over a slice of bread and a contemptuous remark?" She paused, looking deep into Edward's dazed eyes. "No, I do not want to punish you. I want you to understand." Edward stayed silent. Haley lifted her face slightly, eyes red. Amelia stood and stepped into the aisle. She was no longer a victim, she was the one leading. Her voice carried warm and deep, no longer angry, but absolute. "All my life I have heard, do not react, be polite. They taught me to be quiet, to endure, to wait for justice from people who have never been insulted. But I learned one thing. Justice never arrives on its own. It must be reclaimed through the truth. A wave of feeling moved through the cabin. Even those who had mocked her now lowered their heads, as if a bare mirror had been placed before them. Edward said softly, "I did not think it would hurt that much." "No, you did not think," Amelia answered, her voice catching. "That is the cruelest part. People rarely set out to be cruel. They are simply indifferent. And it is that indifference that cracks the world a little more every day." Haley shot to her feet, hands trembling. "I am sorry. I just wanted to do my job. I didn't mean to insult anyone." "I believe you," Amelia said gently. "But that is exactly the problem, Haley. You do not need to intend harm to cause it. All it takes is not caring." The words made Haley sob like a child. Several other passengers fell quiet, their faces showing shame more than fear. Outside the window, the plane slipped through a thin band of cloud, and the city lights below began to appear like gold scattered across the sky. Amelia looked down, the sadness within her easing, replaced by a deep, steady calm. She was no longer angry, because true justice is not when the guilty are punished. It is when they understand why they were wrong. Suddenly the chime sounded through the system. The large screen displayed a new line: executive order received. Disciplinary action confirmed. Then the familiar operations voice returned, by direct instruction from Dr. Amelia Grant, the entire crew of Flight 3. 12 is suspended from duty, effective immediately. The personnel investigation team will take over upon arrival at San Francisco International Airport. Thank you for your cooperation." Haley collapsed into a seat. Edward shut his eyes tight. A few sighs, a few whispers, then absolute silence. Amelia remained standing. She knew she had just put an end to many careers, and she also knew that a system only changes when someone is willing to pay a price. "I do not want to see anyone lose a job," she said, her voice smaller, thick with feeling. "But I cannot allow arrogance and prejudice to keep flying high in this sky. I am not taking revenge. I am cleansing." An elderly woman stood and took Amelia's hand. "Thank you. I went through the same thing once." I did not dare to speak. Amelia gave a sad smile. "You do not have to be silent anymore." From a few rows back, a young man's voice trembled. "Thank you for standing up. We needed to see this." Scattered applause began. At first only a few, then spreading slow and gathering until the entire first class joined in a rolling ovation that echoed through the sky. Amelia sat, her eyes moist. She was not used to applause because all her life she had only been used to proving herself. But today there was nothing left to prove. She had let dignity speak for her. The system voice sounded one last time, gentle like a closing line. "Flight 312 is approaching San Francisco airspace. Estimated landing in 32 minutes. Thank you for flying with Silverline Airways." Amelia smiled softly, not in victory and not in vengeance, but in release. She picked up her phone and turned off secure mode. On the screen, a message from her assistant appeared. All audio and video records have been archived. Global media is exploding. The hashtag Respect in the Skies has reached 8 million in 20 minutes. She nodded lightly. The sky outside remained vast and dark, but inside her there was light. Edward glanced over, his voice tight with emotion. "Miss Grant, I know I deserve punishment. But thank you for not yelling at me." Amelia's eyes softened. I do not need to shout to be heard. The truth is loud enough on its own. As the plane descended and city light poured into the cabin, the air still held traces of fear and regret. But there was something else as well. Something Amelia hadn't felt in a long time. Faith that justice can still exist. That dignity can fly higher than this airplane. She looked down at her phone and touched the final glowing line. When respect is denied, power changes hands. Then she smiled, and at 30,000 feet, Dr. Amelia Grant turned first class into a courtroom for human dignity. The cabin chime sounded a small ding, but it echoed like a bell of judgment. No one spoke. No one even dared to breathe deeply. The first-class cabin of Silverline Flight 312 was no longer a sanctuary of fine wine and polished silver. It had become a courtroom in the sky, where guilt was exposed and justice carried the face of a woman they had once looked down on. Dr. Amelia Grant stood in the aisle, silent and calm, so calm it frightened them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't command. But her very presence was enough to make everyone submit. Outside the window, moonlight spread across the clouds like white ink. Inside the soft golden glow from the cabin, lights brushed against her face, a face carrying both the pain and strength of generations who had been forced to stay silent. The system voice came through cold and precise. By executive order from Grant Global Holdings, all crew members involved in the incident aboard Flight 312 are hereby terminated from employment. All access privileges are revoked effective immediately. The words fell over the cabin like a gavel strike. Haley collapsed into her seat hands, covering her face. Edward stood, frozen lips trembling. No, this can't be. Amelia didn't turn, but her voice cut through the air. It can. And it has. Haley lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Doctor. Grant, I never meant to hurt you. I just... Not me, Amelia interrupted her tone. Not harsh, but sharp enough to freeze the air. You didn't just insult me. You insulted every person who's ever been treated as if they weren't worthy of respect. Haley broke down, sobbing. An older man in row 2 gently placed his hand on her shoulder, not to comfort her, but to help her understand that no one can run from the consequences of their own actions. Edward rose to his feet, clinging to whatever dignity he had left. Miss Grant, I understand now. I'm sorry. But please don't destroy our lives over one mistake. Amelia turned toward him, her eyes locking onto his. You call that a mistake? Do you have any idea how many people are treated like me every single day and no one defends them? For them, this isn't a moment. It's a lifetime. She took a step closer. You say I'm destroying your life, but what you don't understand is this. Your attitude has destroyed the trust, the respect, and the integrity of hundreds of people within this system. I haven't destroyed anything. I've only cut the power to arrogance. The cabin fell silent. Outside, the clouds kept rolling, and the steady hum of the engines sounded like the drums of a verdict that needed no judge. Some passengers began recording again, not to mock, but to capture a moment they knew was historic. An elderly woman with silver hair in row 3 spoke, her voice trembling. My daughter used to be a flight attendant. She once told me a passenger threw a glass at her face because she served too slowly, but she couldn't say a word, afraid she'd lose her job. Tonight, I think you spoke for her. Amelia bowed her head slightly, eyes glistening. Thank you. But I don't want anyone to be afraid, just to be treated with respect. Respect isn't a privilege, it's the most basic duty of being human. Haley stood, voice shaking. Miss Grant, I know nothing can undo what happened, but I'll remember. I'll never laugh again when someone's being humiliated." Amelia looked at her, her expression softening. "Good. Because that's the only way you'll never end up like me, having to use power just to reclaim dignity." Outside the window, the lights of San Francisco began to appear, glittering like stars scattered across the earth. The captain's voice came through rough and tired. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent. Please fasten your seatbelts." No one moved. They just watched Amelia, the woman sitting quietly in the front row, her eyes fixed on the horizon where sky met ground. A message appeared on her phone screen. Global media is now broadcasting the footage live. Over 10 million views. Hashtags bread and water and respect first are trending worldwide. Amelia looked at the message and smiled, not a proud smile, but one of quiet realization, the kind you have when you witness something greater than yourself. Sometimes she thought justice doesn't need a courtroom. It only needs a phone and a slice of bread. The captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in 10 minutes. Thank you for flying with Silver Line Airways." The words sounded like irony. Thank you for flying, yet they were the ones who owed her gratitude. Amelia turned to Edward and Haley. "Today you lost your jobs, but I hope you didn't lose your humanity, because humanity is the only thing that can help a person fly again." She lifted the glass of water. The only thing they had given her, took a small sip, set it down and said softly, "Thank you. I'll keep this glass. Not because it's worth anything, but because it reminds me that arrogance always ends up thirsting for itself." Edward lowered his head. Haley sobbed quietly. The cabin remained silent. Instead of applause, there was only the sound of wind brushing against the windows, as if the sky itself was listening. The plane descended slowly. City lights reflected against the silver body of the aircraft. When the wheels touched the runway, a small round of applause rose not for the airline, but for the truth. A passenger whispered, "This flight will go down in history." The one beside him nodded. Not because of a scandal, but because it proved one thing. Respect doesn't come with a seat class. When the cabin doors opened, security and media representatives were already waiting. Amelia stepped out without bodyguards, without chairs, only flashes of cameras and the quiet bowing of heads. She paused and faced the reporters pressing forward. Her voice was calm, steady, and final. "I didn't do this for revenge. I did it to remind the world dignity has no seat class. And when respect is denied, power changes hands." That night, the video of her standing in first class spread around the globe. They called her the woman who grounded arrogance, the woman who brought arrogance back to earth. And Amelia, in her quiet hotel room, overlooking the runway lights, whispered to herself. They didn't fall. They were just reminded that everyone must learn how to land. In the pale blue light of the coming dawn, Dr. Amelia Grant closed her eyes, knowing that for the first time in years, true justice had finally taken flight. That night, San Francisco welcomed Silver Line Flight 312 in a way no other landing had ever been received. There were no cheers, no laughter, only the flicker of lights, and dozens of cameras aimed at the aircraft door as if waiting for a verdict to be read. When the door opened, the first person to step out was not the captain nor any VIP passenger, but Dr. Amelia Grant, dressed simply in a white suit, holding a phone that was still glowing in her hand. She did not bow, she did not avoid the cameras, and she did not smile. Because she knew this moment was not for celebration. It was for the world to look into a mirror. Behind her, two security officers escorted Edward Turner and Haley Ross off the plane. No handcuffs, no insults, just a silence so heavy it could be felt. Haley kept her head down, her eyes red, while Edward held his back straight, his hands clenched, as if standing at the edge of a cliff. Camera flashes erupted again and again. A reporter shouted, "Dr. Grant, how do you feel knowing the world is calling this the flight of justice?" Amelia stopped and turned toward the crowd. Her voice was steady, each word landing like a hammer striking stone. "I did not seek justice for myself. I only wanted the world to remember that respect is not a reward, it is a standard." The cameras went wild, shutters clicking in waves. But she said nothing more, because sometimes the simplest words echo the furthest. As she left the airport, the press continued to follow. The news spread like wildfire. CEO humiliated on flight funded by her own company. Grant Global suspends entire Silverline. Flight 312 crew airline faces biggest ethical crisis of the decade. On social media, the hashtag #RespectInTheSkies exploded. In one night, over 25 million shares from politicians, celebrities, and everyday people. Meanwhile, in a small conference room at Silverline Airways headquarters, the executives gathered for an emergency meeting. The airline's CEO, Richard Hale, stared at the screen, replaying the video, Haley placing the slice of bread and the glass of water before Amelia. When he heard the line, "Respect is earned, not demanded," he closed his eyes. A long breath escaped him, heavy with guilt. "She isn't just a partner," he said hoarsely. "She just taught the entire aviation industry a lesson." No one in the room replied, because they all knew the lesson had cost $900 million. As for Amelia, she did not return to a luxury hotel or to the Grant Global headquarters. She walked along the coast where the night wind tangled her hair and waves crashed gently against the rocks. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but her gaze lingered on the dark horizon. She thought of Haley, of Edward, of the hundreds of thousands of people in service industries making the same mistake, forgetting that respect is not conditional. And in the salty wind, she realized she wasn't angry at them. She was angry at a society that had made people believe respect was only owed to those who looked important. She remembered herself, at 17, her first day working at a small cafe in New York. Customers would order without looking at her. One man once tossed money on the counter and said, "Get me another brown girl." Back then she had smiled, stayed silent, and served him. Because she thought silence was a form of maturity. But now, at 42, standing at the top of the world, she understood silence never makes people grow. It only gives permission to those who belittle others to keep going. Her phone vibrated. A message from her assistant appeared. "The media team is waiting for your official statement. CNN, BBC, The Guardian all want interviews in the morning. Do you want to respond?" Amelia looked at the screen, smiled faintly, and typed 2 words. "No need." She knew she didn't have to speak anymore because now millions of people were speaking for her. Across the world, in a small cafe in Chicago, a young black waitress watched Amelia's video. Tears filled her eyes as she heard the line, "Respect isn't a luxury. It's the baseline of civilization." She wiped her face and whispered to her co-worker, "She's speaking for all of us." And somewhere in Tokyo, a young flight attendant turned off her phone, looked out the window and told herself, "Tomorrow I'll be different." By morning, the story had gone global. The front page of the New York Times carried the headline, "When Dignity Takes Flight." The article described Amelia Grant as the woman who made an entire industry look at itself. Media outlets around the world called her the symbol of modern justice. But Amelia wasn't seeking titles. She wanted only one thing that every employee, every leader, every human being when facing another person would ask themselves, am I treating them as a human being? That afternoon, in her bright office, Amelia stood before her team of assistants. Her usual sternness was gone. Holding a cup of coffee, her voice was low and warm. Tomorrow I want to launch a new initiative. Call it The Sky Belongs to Everyone. The goal isn't to assign blame. The goal is to teach people to see each other as people. The room stayed silent. A young staff member nodded, eyes glistening. And remember, Amelia continued her gaze, shifting toward the vast blue sky outside the window. We don't need more laws. We just need more humanity. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of crimson gold. A Silverline aircraft passed overhead, bearing a new slogan freshly painted on its fuselage, "Respect first, always." Amelia looked up and nodded. In that moment, she was no longer the woman humiliated in Seat 1A. She was the woman redefining what respect meant. The sky that evening was calm, but the world was not, because millions of people were awakening, not in anger, but in awareness. And as night fell beneath the soft lights of the city, Amelia's voice continued to echo across millions of screens. When arrogance falls, what remains is humanity. And so above the sky, where laughter once mocked, only one quiet reminder remained, one the world would never forget. Respect never needs to be proven. It only needs to be practiced. Morning light poured through the cabin windows, painting the misty runway in shades of gold. Silverline Flight 312 rolled forward slowly, its wheels humming softly against the pavement, a sound that marked the end of one journey, but the beginning of a transformation. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. Each person was lost in their own thoughts. Someone who had laughed now sat with their head bowed. Someone who had stayed silent now wept quietly. And in the front row, Dr. Amelia Grant simply looked out the window, where the new light pierced the fading fog. When the plane came to a full stop, the intercom clicked on and the captain's voice filled the cabin deep and trembling. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to apologize to you, Miss Grant, and to all passengers. We forgot the most important thing. Respect is not a service. It is a reflection of character. The cabin remained still for a moment. Then slowly, applause began, first hesitant, then rising, filling the air. No one was clapping for the airline. They were applauding the truth. As the plane door opened, Amelia straightened her white suit jacket. Haley approached, her eyes swollen and red hands trembling as she reached out. "Thank you for not staying silent." Amelia looked at her, took her hand gently. "I didn't do this to destroy anyone. I did it to save what we've all been losing." Then she stepped out of the cabin, each step light, yet carrying the weight of millions who had ever been dismissed or disrespected. Outside, the morning sun blazed across the tarmac. Reporters crowded forward, microphones raised, cameras flashing like fireworks. Amelia stopped but said nothing. The wind caught her hair, and for a brief moment, the world fell completely silent. Then she spoke a single sentence, a sentence that the world would remember. No one is born to sit in a lower seat. Respect must be humanity's default position. As she left the airport, sunlight washed over her calm face. The sky above seemed clearer, as if it too had been freed from the weight of arrogance. And somewhere across millions of screens around the world, people were watching that moment again, the moment when one ordinary woman made the world understand that dignity doesn't need a title to soar. A week after the fateful flight, the world was still reeling from its impact. On social media, millions continued to share the video, captioning it with a simple truth: she didn't seek revenge. She taught the world how to behave. Airlines around the globe began revising their service policies. Talks and seminars about respect in professional environments appeared everywhere. And in the skies, the new Silverline Airways logo carried an added phrase: respect first. Always. In the top-floor office of Grant Global Holdings, Dr. Amelia Grant stood by the window, watching a plane bearing that same emblem lift off from the runway. She didn't smile, she simply nodded softly, because she understood that true victory was never about making others fear you, but about making them reflect on themselves. Beside her, her young assistant spoke quietly. "You've changed an entire industry, Dr. Grant," she replied gently, her voice calm yet warm. "No. I only did what everyone should have done, remind the world that respect shouldn't have to be demanded. It should be default." On the screen before her, a new video was spreading rapidly. A flight attendant on a Silverline flight was apologizing to passengers for a delay, ending with the words, "Thank you for flying with us. This sky belongs to everyone." Amelia watched, her eyes glistening, because this was no longer about humiliation, and it was no longer about power. It was about the legacy of empathy. That evening she stepped onto her balcony, looking up at the sky where plane lights blinked against the dark. She whispered as if speaking to herself, "I don't want them to remember my name. I just want them to remember that sometimes it takes only one person brave enough to stand up to change the direction of the entire world." The night breeze brushed past her. In the distance, a plane ascended its trail of light, stretching across the heavens like a stroke of ink, writing words across the sky. When dignity takes flight, no power can bring it down. And at that altitude between the clouds and the stars, the legacy of Dr. Amelia Grant was no longer just about power. It was the enduring belief that justice, when rooted in human dignity, can truly fly forever. From the perspective of an expert in leadership culture and professional ethics, the journey of Dr. Amelia Grant is not just a story about justice. It is a sobering reminder for an entire era, one where compassion is often overshadowed by arrogance disguised as professionalism. She did not use power to seek revenge, but used dignity to restore the natural order of respect. Because power can make others bow their heads, but only integrity can make them lift their heads in admiration. At 30,000 feet, Amelia proved that justice doesn't need noise, only timing, and that the silence of the righteous can echo farther than the shouts of the arrogant. In today's world where every word and every action reflects the true essence of who we are, remember this: respect is not a service. It is the foundation of civilization. If you believe that humanity still has a place in this world, click. Like to share that message, subscribe, so you don't miss the stories where dignity is tested against power. And before you go, leave a comment below with the phrase that best reflects your faith in what is right. Keep your dignity.